welcome back, everybody. So in the previous stream, we cleaned up a bunch of boilerplate. We started using the Expedia Group's GraphQL Kotlin library. And essentially what we're doing now is rather than building a schema and then generating Java code or Kotlin code that matches that schema, we're actually using our Kotlin code to generate our schema, our queries, and our mutations, things like that. So we're moving further along, kind of getting our basic infrastructure within our backend application set up. And today we're going to go a little bit further, and we're going to add a cache. I'm going to need a cache in this application because sources of stock market data are expensive, and also a lot of stock market data doesn't actually change very often, and in particular some of it doesn't even change on the weekends because the market isn't open. So what we're going to do is we're going to add a cache to cache the call it quote data, right? Or data that's going to tell us, this is kind of the current state of a company in the stock market. And we're going to cache that for a certain amount of time while the market is open, or call it during the week. And then after hours, so after market hours or on the weekend, we are actually going to cache for a different time. And so we're going to get into writing a custom cache policy in Micronaut. So let's go ahead and get started. So I'm going to be using Redis, and Micronaut has a Redis implementation built in for its cache driver. So we need to go ahead and add this to our build.gradle file. And we are just going to grab the Redis, or well, in this case, Lettuce, which is the Java driver, or the non-blocking Java driver for Redis, which is what Micronaut uses under the hood. There's an implementation of this. So we're going to go ahead and add that, and then we also need to add it to our dev. And you'll notice here I have this here because I used to, or I just about always use Redis in just about every project. But this is pretty old, so let's go ahead and find a new one, whatever the latest and greatest is, which looks like it is 6.0.6. So we'll pull that in. Yep, that looks good. Redis typically runs default on port 6379. We'll leave that as default. And in order to also check out the logs and what might be happening in case we get into any trouble, let's go ahead and check out how we turn on kind of more verbose logging. Because when we first start Redis up, we're not going to see anything. And what we can do is, so you can provide a configuration file to Redis, and at the same time you can also change any of the defaults or anything in your file at the command line as well. So if we look at the Redis conf for 6.0, you'll see this is the default file, and what we're looking for is something like the log level, I'm guessing is what it's called. Yeah, log level. So we can change this at the command line when we start it up, and we can change it to debug to see what we got. So if I don't have a command here, it simply runs whatever the default is that is defined in the Docker file. But in this case, I want a custom command, right? I want to tell it, I want you to run this thing instead of what's the default. So in order to spin up Redis server, it's the command is just Redis server. And then we can go ahead and add some information here. We will add the port, even though it's not really necessary. I'll just make sure that it's working. And the next thing we're going to add is the log level, which level, all lowercase, like this. Oh, but it's hang on, I think if I remember correctly, passing arguments via the command line. Since Redis 2.6, very useful for testing. Format for the arguments passed in via the command line is exactly the same as one used in the Redis comp file, with the exception that the keyword is prefixed with dash dash. Yeah, okay. So this should be fine. And then we're going to pass debug. So let's go ahead and get ourselves a terminal here. And let's run make dev, start this up. And yeah, looks like our Redis server started up. And we're getting some more information. So that looks pretty good. Okay. So we'll kind of keep that out of the way here. So our Redis server is up and running. And now let's go ahead and take a look at, in particular, the docs for Micronaut Cache, so that we can get a feel for how the cache works. So in very similar, I want the docs, not the guide, user guide. Cache. I think it's right here, right? No? Cache advice, cache's endpoint, cache module, there we go. Okay. So we also need to bring in the core cache. So this will bring in the actual pieces of Micronaut that brings this in. And so Micronaut uses a cache abstraction very similar to Spring or others that is annotation based. And there's three main items: cacheable, cache put, and cache invalidate. We'll probably only go over the first two because they're the kind of the most relevant. Cache invalidate we'll talk a little bit about, but we probably won't use it in this stream. So now that we have this cache in, let's go ahead and go back into our code here. And we're actually going to create a new package here called quotes. And then what we will do is we're going to create a new bean that is going to be responsible for getting the quotes for our stocks. Okay, and for now we're just going to fake it, but for all intents and purposes we'll fill this in later. Again, I just want to kind of demonstrate how this works, right? So we've got our quote service, and essentially what we're going to expect is that when someone sends us a ticker or a symbol for a given stock, we're going to want to return a quote for that stock, and then we will pass that along, and we're going to want to cache that because stock market data and the APIs, right, to get that information is expensive. So we're going to say something like get quote. You'll pass in a symbol, right? We're going to return a quote object of some sort, and we'll go from there. So this returns a quote. All right, so what are we going to have in here? So we're definitely going to have a symbol, right? So that's the symbol that was passed in, right? What else? GraphQL. So we're probably going to have, let's just keep it simple for now. We're going to have the current price. That's going to be a double. What else would be good to have in our quotes? There's a bunch of different stuff, right? So there's like, you know, company name. We might want the high and the low for the day, right? And maybe and then maybe like the last time the time was updated, right? So you know, when this quote was actually updated. And we're gonna move this into our GraphQL definitions, because this is actually going to be something that we're going to return from GraphQL. A quote for, okay. We're going to import that. Okay, so here's where things start to get interesting. So if I want to cache this, I simply put cacheable or cache put, one or the other, onto this method. So let's talk a little bit about what these two things do, and why you might use one or the other. So cacheable. So cacheable indicates that a method is cacheable with a given cache name. And cache put indicates that the return value of a method invocation should be cached. Unlike cacheable, the original operation is never skipped. So what that means is that if I put cacheable on here, it's going to basically always assume that there is something in the cache for this, which may not be the case, right? Because things are going to be expiring and things like that. So we always want it to, you know, try to run the method for the first time if there's nothing in the cache. Okay, and then here we'll just have some, you know, some quote data, some dummy data, right? And this is what we will pull out here. So map of, and we'll do some quotes here, right, like this. All right, and quote, typically like to do something like this. And we're gonna get rid of, why doesn't it format like that? That's really annoying. Okay, so we'll fix this. So symbol is Tesla. The price is very, very, very high. The high, should make something up, and the low, and the last update was oh boy, I can't even remember what the what is the, yeah, there we go. It's just not current time in millis. I was like, man, I haven't done that in a while. Forgot about that. Okay. What else am I missing? Company name, of course. Okay. So let's just take this. All right, formatting on this is horrendous for some reason. There we go. Okay, so this is just going to return quote data symbol. And we will we don't need a suspend on there. have that out of habit. Actually, yeah, we're just going to force this for now. I know this isn't good to do, but for the purposes of this will be just fine. This is going to be a singleton. Okay, so we have our method that returns a quote for a given company, for a given symbol. We are caching the results of this method call, and we ensure that this runs, right? Now we actually have to configure our cache, which is going to look a little something like this, right? So we have to go into our application.properties, right? And we actually have to add our cache. Okay, so how do you do that? So first things first, right? We need to set the Redis URI, which is essentially just going to be our local host, right? So, okay. Next, I always like to set a timeout, and I always like to set it pretty aggressively. So if it doesn't respond in, say, like 100 milliseconds, go ahead and run the actual method. So kind of like act like it's not there. So then this is where things get a little interesting. So you can have a number of different caches in your app. And so the configuration file or the properties file lets you name these caches or define these caches, and then define different properties for them so that you can keep different domain objects or things, whatever you're caching, different. So you'll see, right, it says redis.caches.star. So that's where you're actually going to put in what you're caching. So I'm going to put in quotes, okay? And I'm going to set a couple things. So I'm going to set the character set to be UTF-8. Quotes again. The next thing I'm going to set is the value serializer. So this is basically how Redis, or how the cache implementation actually serializes stuff to disk, or stuff to Redis, sorry. And Micronaut has a couple of these. I am just going to use the JSON one because that is usually the simplest. And so I'm going to look at the Micronaut. I think it's the serialized package. Let's go to GitHub and let's look for Jackson objects serializer. Yeah, there we go. Okay, so basically what we're going to say is we're going to want it to use this thing, right? So Micronaut has a bunch of different things in here. One of these is this Jackson object serializer. And you'll notice it implements object serializer, which is what this thing is looking for. So we can grab the package on this. So that's going to be that. And we're going to want to use the Jackson object serializer like that. Okay. So character set UTF-8, serializing our quotes with this. So now we can go back. Now that we've defined our cache, right, we now have to tell our app what cache to actually use, right? And the way that that is done is with @cache_config, and then you just give it the name of your cache, I think is the way that it's done. Redis there. Yeah, you can also have multiple Redis servers. Redis for caching. We'll get into this in a bit. Micronaut cache. Where does it have stuff about config? Yeah, I'm pretty sure it's cache config. That might be something they should put in the docs. I'm pretty sure this is right. Annotation that can be used, configure common caching behavior. Yeah. Okay, so we now have our configuration in place, and we're telling basically this method, right? Anytime you see a cache annotation, we're going to use the config that is in quotes. The last thing we need to do is hook up our actual query, quotes query, to actually get the quote. So we're going to do get quote. It's going to return a quote, right? And we are going to return, or actually this is going to pull in that quote service that we just had, right? What else? And then in order to actually get the quotes, right? So this is sending in a symbol. We're gonna return the quote. Oops, private. We're gonna turn the quote service, get quote, pass it this, hit the symbol as well. This doesn't actually need suspend. We'll get into that later. Okay. So let's go ahead and put our standard stuff on here to get a quote for a security by its symbol. All right. Then we need to add this to our top level declaration, I believe. So not only do we need our resource resolver, but we now actually need a reference to our quote service. And we are going to have a new top level object called quote query, and we're going to pass it in our quote service, right? Okay. So this is also kind of a bit of a new thing that we did, right? So our quotes query, right, actually needs a downstream service or a thing to actually do its work, right? So we're delegating its work, and we're using dependency injection and saying, hey, we need an instance of quote service. And in our actual factory, right, we can say, hey, you know, we need a quote service, and then we put these things together here. So alrighty. Let's go ahead and give this a shot. I'm sure I forgot something or other. Actually, let's go ahead and do, we're gonna add, so let's add some logging so we can actually prove that our logging is working. That's always good. I wanna make sure that this works. All right, so we're gonna debug. So we're gonna say running quotes query for symbol. Oops. Right, and then let's put a thing in here. We're gonna say getting quote for symbol. Right, okay. And so what we should see is we should see this run once for a given quote, but then not again, right? Because that is cached. So let's go ahead and spin this app up, see if we forgot or broke anything, but I don't think we did, but you never know. Okay. All right, so we're up and running. Let's go to our graphical, and we got something wrong here. Okay, invalid quote object type. Object does not expose any fields. Okay, Let's look at our quotes. Yeah, these don't need to all be private. Okay. Whoop. Data source. Oh, you know what? We don't need our database on, so let's just go ahead and turn off all of our database stuff for now so that doesn't bug us, because what we're really focused on is Redis. Okay, so here our graphical endpoint is up. We can get a quote for a given symbol, and let's query is get quote. Okay, symbol, company name, high, low, and the price. Right, that looks pretty good. Okay, so if we run this for a object that we have, we didn't see any logging. We probably need to configure our log back to log for our packages. So we need to do logger name and our root packages com.that, com.centerboard, and then we're going to set this to debug so we see everything. I think that should do the trick. So let's redo this. Run our query, still no logs. Why no logs? Oh, there we go. Now I know why. It's because I got my package wrong. There we go. That's got to be it. Okay. Yep, there we go. Okay, so you'll see, right? We ran the quotes query, and then we got the quote for the symbol in the quote service. Now, if I run this again, I should see getting quote for symbol Tesla. Okay, so that's not what we want. It's clearly not caching. Okay, so let's find out what we did wrong. Because we should be caching that. Actually, I may have gotten this reversed. Cache put indicates the return value of a method should be cached. Unlike cacheable, the original operation is never skipped. Right? Yeah, this is wrong. So you would use cache put, and I goofed these up quite a bit. So you use cache put when you want the method you're calling to always put something in the cache, but that method is always going to get run, right? The operation is never skipped. Cacheable is kind of the standard behavior that you want. You know, check the cache, run it if it's there. If it's not, I'll go ahead and run this operation. All right, so let's go ahead and run this. And we will run that. You'll see we ran our quotes query for the symbol, right? Because again, our previous run was actually caching that, right? So if we kill, so we can test this now, right? So if we kill our cache, right, and we bring it back up again and we run it, now we'll see kind of that behavior we expect, right? Where the first time we run it, it runs the operation and hits the cache and puts it in the cache, right? So it gets the quote, right? And then the next time it only runs the query, right? So now, again, we've just cached our actual query, which is great. Now, okay, so we have our query that is caching. which is great. I'm getting a call. 1 second here. 1 second. Give me just a second. All right, sorry about that. Okay, so now what we want to do, right, is we haven't actually set anything related to how long we should be caching these for things, right, or these quotes for, right? These quotes get stale, they change, right? So I'll talk about one of the ways that you can do that. So one of the easiest ways, right, is if you know there's like a given amount of time something is going to be cached for, you can just set that in the properties file, right? So you can say expire this thing after write for a given time, right? And again, you can do this per cache. So if I wanted to, I could cache all of these quotes for a given time, right? I could say, 1 minute or something like that, right? But that's not what we want to do. We actually want something that is far more flexible, right? So the stock market is open for a given period of time, Monday through Friday, except for holidays. And then it's not really open on the weekend. And so while there are after hours trading and things like that, like prices can actually change, the vast majority of the other data that you might get, right? For example, the high and the low isn't going to change. You can actually cache that for longer. So let's go ahead and do that. Okay, so the way to do this is with what's called an expiration after write policy. So you can see here that this defines a class path for implementation of expiration after write policy. So let's take a look at what that interface is, expiration after write policy. So this is an interface that defines a TTL policy for a given Redis cache. And basically what this does is it says get expiration after write. So it passes you in a value or an object that's going to be put in the cache. And then basically you return it the TTL of what that is. So what we're going to do is we're going to write a custom policy for our quotes that caches them for, say, a minute or 30 seconds during the week, right, Monday through Friday. But on the weekends, we're going to cache that data for much longer because it's really not changing that often, okay? So let's go ahead and do that. So we're going to create, let's call it, that got put into the wrong thing. We're going to go in here into our quotes and we're going to do a new cache policy, right? So we're going to call it class quote cache policy. And this is a, what's it called again? Expiration after write policy is the interface. Expiration after write policy. We're going to import that. We're going to implement the members, right? And we're going to go ahead and get started. So it doesn't really matter that because again, we're just going to set this cache policy for the actual quotes. So it doesn't necessarily need to be dynamic. Expiration after write policy is going to be calling our quote cache policy. Okay, and here's where we can write our actual code to define what we want to happen, right? So what do we want? So what I'm going to say for now is that Monday through Friday, we're going to cache our quote data for up to a minute. And then on the weekends, we want to cache that quote for 15 minutes, right? So we're going to go ahead and do that. So this returns a long, which if I believe I remember correctly, yeah, TTL of the document of Redis in milliseconds, right? So, our default, right, is going to be, let's call it 1 minute, right? So 2 millis, right? So we're saying we want to expire it in 1 minute. Now, what we need to do is we need to figure out if it's on the weekend, right? Then we want to cache that quote for longer. So let's go ahead and do that. So we're gonna get today. The other thing that we want to do is, because the US stock market is primarily based from the Eastern time zone, we want to check the Eastern time zone. And you'll notice on calendar.getInstance, right, one of those things is a time zone. So let's go ahead and get the time zone, and I believe the pattern is something like this. And how would we confirm that? So one thing I love about Kotlin, and this is kind of a tip, you can throw a main class or a main method really anywhere in your project, in any class pretty much, to run a quick snippet of code. So I do this often. So all you do is type main, and there is you can actually type a couple things, right? There's main. You can also type PSVM, right? Public static void main, the old school Java way, right? So I'm going to go ahead and put this main here. And then what I'm going to do is I need to try and figure out which string value you have to pass in here. So I'm going to do timezone dot get available IDs, and I'm going to print all of those out. All right, so I'm going to run this, and what this should give me is like all of the, so this gives me all the time zones, right? So what I'm looking for is Eastern or ECT, US Eastern right there, right? So that's what I want. So I was right, US Eastern. Okay, so we can get rid of this, right? So we have our today, and now what we want is the day of today, right? So that is essentially today dot get, right? Calendar dot day of the week, right? Yep. What the heck? Why don't you sit right here? Yeah. No biting. Here you go. Have a teething puppy that decided to start chewing on the carpet. It's always fun. Okay, so let's, so we've got our day, right? That is, whatever today's day is. And we're gonna just define a list of weekend days. So we're gonna say calendar.Saturday and calendar.Sunday are the weekend, right? We'll also need, let's go ahead and just put in here a logger so that we can test out our logic as well. Quote cache policy. Okay, so now what we're going to do is we're going to say if the weekend contains today, we're going to change the expiration time. So we're actually going to set this to var, and our expiration is going to be, whoa. Oh, no. No. Come here, you. Here we go. Oh, boy. Puppy is getting restless. We gotta finish this up. Okay. All right, so we are gonna set it to, call it hours, and let's say 2 millis. We're gonna, quote it for 12 hours or something like that, right? And then otherwise we're essentially gonna do nothing, but we can say, hey, we are caching quote for this, not on the weekend, right? Expiration, and then we're going to put this up here. we're going to say for expiration on the weekend. Okay, I think that should be good. Let's go ahead and run our application again. We're also going to kill our Redis cache and bring it back up. And let's go ahead and see what happens. Okay, so when we run this, the first time, it's again going to run, make the call. It then should hit this cache policy thing to figure out, again, when it should, or how long it should cache for. And then because we're on the weekend, it should see caching quote for on the weekend. And we'll go ahead, and if we did our job, that will work. So it runs, running quotes query, getting quote for symbol Tesla, but we didn't see our cache policy, which I think that means it didn't actually work. Okay, so what did we miss? Let's go to our properties. Oh, yep. That's no good. Okay, so now kill the cache again, bring this back up, run this. Yes, there we go, right? So it's saying, hey, we're caching this because we're on the weekend, right? So now, again, this is cached for a lot longer. And just to show you that this works, right, is rather than caching it for a minute, we could cache it for 5 seconds on the weekends, right? And so this means it's going to only cache for 5 seconds rather than a minute. And so then you'll actually notice, so if we, and we'll kill this, bring this back up. We hit this, it's going to cache for 5 seconds. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. It's caching quote, right? And if we hit it for the next 5 seconds, it's going to hit the thing, right? And then at some point, right, bang, after 5 seconds, it's out of the cache, and then that thing has to get run again. So this is really powerful. This is going to come in handy when we are caching all of this market data. So we're probably going to actually expand on this even more, right? Because again, the market's open, I believe, from 9:30 to 4:30 Eastern time. So we can expand rather than this, relatively simple, on the weekend, right, or whatever. We can actually expand this to be kind of essentially outside of market open hours to properly cache this. So, so what do we do today, right? So again, we added a Redis cache to our app, right? We added the ability to cache a specific method, right, with the cacheable annotation. And then finally, we did some custom timeout logic to expire things in our cache. So if you have any questions, please let me know. We will be back in a little while. Thanks.